Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to another You Be the Behavior Consultant. I was off there daydreaming for a moment and almost didn't get started on time. So I'm sorry if I'm a couple seconds late, but hopefully you can hear me and you're excited for another live stream. I'm super excited to be here. All right. And Cynthia's here with us. Hopefully you can hear me. I don't hear myself just yet. It could be, oh, there we are. It could be that I had the volume down just a little bit too low. Super excited for this one today because we're going to be talking about a bunch of people that I just admire so much, and I'm super happy to share some information about what they all are doing. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. If you haven't joined us before, this is You Be the Behavior Consultant, a live stream I try to do most Mondays, and this is how it works. We have a topic for discussion. I have a few questions and discussion prompts for you to get started, and we do have some video examples today, and of course we will recap it all at the end. And here is our topic. We are going to celebrate the unsung, as I say, real heroes of addressing fear and aggression with negative reinforcement. So that's fear and aggressive responses that are maintained by negative reinforcement. And I like to consider this a story of courage and science and change. And hopefully we'll be able to kind of illustrate that as we go through this. Let me see. I'm going to do one little thing here so that I can see my little tiny words a little bit better. And here are my questions for you. So you may or may not know some of the key contributors to the modern application of the constructional approach that uses distance as a reinforcer for behaviors maintained by negative reinforcement. If not, that's okay. We're going to get into that. And if you have been using negative reinforcement, maybe you can share some of the ways that you've been incorporating an understanding of negative reinforcement contingencies to use distance as a reinforcer in your training, and you know how it's changed your training. How has it influenced the well-being of the animals you work with? And I also like to talk about why it's important to recognize and accurately give attribution to those who've taught us all these things and these concepts, and how that impacts your practice. So and what the implications are for both science and the animals we serve. So maybe you have some insights into some of those questions. So feel free to drop any of that in the comments whenever you feel like as we go through this. And I see we've got some more regulars here. We've got Alex here and Steffi's here with us too. That's awesome. I'm so excited. So I'm going to start with why I think this conversation is really important to have. So of course we love positive reinforcement. I want to make sure everybody knows that here. We are big fans of positive reinforcement. But and this is kind of a hypothesis that I have. I can't tell you that I know that this is exactly what happened, but I sort of think that maybe why we're in this situation where we are is, at least from my experience, when I kind of got involved in animal training quite a few years ago, I was really taught that, the way you train animals is you have to use positive reinforcement. That's the procedure we focus on. And I think maybe that kind of, overemphasis on positive reinforcement might have contributed to a bit of a blind spot that there are many behaviors that are maintained by negative reinforcement contingencies. But when I was taught, that we have to use positive reinforcement no matter what, it just kind of caused us to bypass looking for what outcomes are actually maintaining behaviors. So I think that kind of put us in a position where maybe we started using superimposition a lot of positive reinforcement being superimposed over negative reinforcement contingencies. Now, back then, I didn't have the language. I didn't even know how to look for that kind of stuff. This is all stuff we've learned in recent years, or at least I have learned in recent years. Other people knew about it, but I didn't. And then we didn't know how to deal with that. So what tools we had in our toolbox back then was we would focus on things like exposure therapy, so systematic desensitization and counter conditioning. We might also use extinction, ignore the thing you didn't like and positively reinforce the thing you did like. So differential reinforcement of incompatible behaviors, differential reinforcement of alternative behaviors. What we didn't know then, but we're learning a lot about now, is that can create some problems, right? Animals get frustrated. We might see some fear responses continue, some aggression continue. And a lot of times we see that the problem doesn't really get addressed because that negative reinforcement contingency remains untouched. So what's happening there? We might get delays to appropriate interventions. Maybe we do sort of figure out how to use a little negative reinforcement, but we didn't realize it. We just sort of try some things, but we're not really aware of how we get there. And I think for a lot of situations, we kind of have this compromised welfare because we're not really getting to the solution, or it's sort of this ongoing cycle of animals in this place of reduction procedures being used and the superimposition going on. But what was really cool, that really only happened about 20 years ago, was this turning point in animal training. And that's what we're going to kind of talk about today, and how that happened. And so, this is, again, what I feel like I observed in the animal training world, and this turning point. So what is this turning point? Well, this is sort of this contemporary view of negative reinforcement. And of course, negative reinforcement is a learning process. It has its formal definition in which, there's a stimulus, event, or condition, and it's removed, and following that behavior, and that causes an increase in the likelihood of that behavior occurring again in the future or similar conditions. So in this contemporary view, we think about negative reinforcement maintaining typically what we consider undesired behaviors. And when we're looking at it the way we are looking at it in a constructional approach, those conditions might already be present in the environment, or maybe if something's being inserted in the environment, it's something that we need in that environment in order to take care of the animal. So maybe it's like a syringe to give an injection, or maybe you're trying to insert an ultrasound wand so that you can check something going on there with the animal. And how we're going to deal with those situations is that we're going to shape new desired responses, but we're going to do it under conditions in which we're not going to evoke these undesired responses, hopefully. And so we kind of consider that a benign application of negative reinforcement, but it does involve sort of a very refined procedure. And so that means we have to start under these conditions that are where it's possible for that animal to be very, very comfortable and relaxed, give us desired responses, and then that aversive stimulus goes away, or maybe we modify the aversive stimulus so it doesn't evoke undesired responses. And then some other things that are really important is that the animal has multiple behaviors that it can emit. So maybe it can, shift its weight. Maybe it can look over here. Maybe it can just lay down. There's lots of different behaviors that it can emit so that undesired stimulus goes away. And it can still use the behavior that worked before. That's really important. So if it wants to walk away, it can. If it needs to give a little vocalization that tells you it doesn't like it, that works too. All those behaviors still work. So that's what we consider genuine choice. And it can be measured with degrees of freedom. So all those are really important to improve emotional welfare for the animal. So this approach has really enhanced animal well-being across species. And that, there's a lot more detail to that and how it's applied under a lot of different conditions. And we're not going to go into all that today. There's a lot of resources and a lot of people that I'm going to share with you today that can give you more resources on that. But I did want to just touch on that so people understand what we're talking about to some extent, because I think that's really important. But what I really want to get into is paying tribute to all those people who I think, based on my experience being involved in this and watching it over the years, really did pay a professional, an emotional, and sometimes a financial price to advance the science to help promote these compassionate interventions that I think have truly advanced emotional welfare. So with that, what we're going to do is we're going to look at some charts to kind of help look at the timeline of what happened. And some of this may be familiar to you and some of it may not be, but I hope maybe it's a little bit eye-opening for people. So first of all, I will say this is just kind of a summary highlighting just a portion of the work that's been done. And these to me are some of the leading contributors. If I have forgotten anybody, oh my gosh, please drop it in the chat there because, this is me kind of putting things together kind of rapidly. And And of course, there are a lot more people. I do think a lot of these people did face criticism and resistance, and I think that's really important to point out. And also, what also is missing here is there's a lot of work that's been done in the field with human learners. I tried to focus primarily on the animal field, since we mostly have people that work with animals here that listen to this particular live stream. So again, there's a lot more than what I'm going to cover here. Keep that in mind as well. So I first wanted to point out what was started in the 1950s, and of course is continuing to happen, is that's where the scientific foundations were really kind of beginning and started. So we have the scientific foundations, the philosophy, the research, the papers, the practical applications, really those significant contributions to the experimental and applied field that we know of as having come from Israel Golddiamond, T.V. Joe Lang, Paul Andranis, and a lot of that work was done with human learners and pigeons and rats. And so that's where we think about the constructional approach, degrees of freedom, genuine choice, nonlinear contingency analysis, emotions as contingency descriptors, contingency adduction, all those foundational things that we talk about really got started way back then, right? But I think a really big turning point for animal trainers happened at UNT in the Organization for Reinforcement Contingencies for Animals group there at UNT under the guidance of Dr. Jesus Rosales-Ruiz. He's really the one that kind of kick-started this whole community really looking at using distance as a reinforcer, negative reinforcement, when it's appropriate, to address things like fear responses and aggressive behavior. And that's really where a lot of the empirical studies were done. And that's really important, right? And so I may have my number not 100% accurate here. Hopefully those folks will chime in for me, but I counted on their website, and I don't know that it's been updated recently, but I counted at least 14 empirical studies on constructional approaches with animals that were exploring negative reinforcement as an important contingency. And of course, they continued to do work there with practical application and teaching others, giving presentations, things of that nature, hosting the Art and Science of Animal Training Conference, dissemination of information. And there's just a few of the names of some of the people that did some of those empirical studies. And if you go to that URL that I have there, you can look at those studies yourself. So please do that. I encourage you to do that so you can see there have been empirical studies on this. Most of their work was with dogs and cats and horses and goats. I think there's one with sheep too. So please go check that out for some more really important work that was done there. And then also a really significant one was the one with Kelly Snyder. And Kelly Snyder and Jesus Rosales-Ruiz went on to teach a few workshops on that, lecture at different places. And they also made an instructional video with dogs. And so that really tended to, had some more dissemination in the dog community, which I think was really important. And that was, 2008 that I have there? And then Mary Hunter was also a really big, important part of that, I think, especially when it comes to refining those procedures. So I think this is one of the things that we really need to keep in mind is that in those early days, this is when people were, first putting out these procedures. And I have to admit, I'm one of those people because of what I had been exposed to as an animal trainer. I was one of those people that was told it's positive reinforcement only, no, nothing else. So I was critical, and, it took me a while to come around. And I remember watching some of those procedures and thinking, oh, no, this isn't good. But they were working on their refinements as well. And I can say the same about my own work. When I look at videos of myself learning how to do this, I had a lot of refining to do. So, I think, the refinements have been coming all along as we continue to apply this procedure, which is, that's what we do, right? That's what we all do as animal trainers. We get better the more that we apply and scrutinize what we're doing and look for ways that we can improve upon our practices. So Mary Hunter has done lots of presentations, papers, podcasts, courses, protocols, ongoing teaching with dogs, horses, and other companion animals. And you can find her work at behaviorexplorer.com. And then Kelly, the work that she did, she turned that into a book in 2018. So that can give you more information about the procedures that she worked on. And then I think as we move on here, 2018 was really the turning point for me. I had a really impactful conversation with Jesus at the Art and Science of Animal Training Conference. And that's when I first started applying it and really had a moment where I said, okay, I need to learn more and understand this more. And I think for me, what started happening is I just did like what a lot of people do. As I said, okay, I just got to try it. And that's what I often encourage people to do, because the transition from and of course I still use positive reinforcement all the time. And as many people know, with the negative reinforcement procedure, your goal is to transition to positive reinforcement. You're addressing that negative reinforcement contingency so positive reinforcement can be effective. And but learning how to apply that negative reinforcement procedure does take practice, just like you practice shaping with positive reinforcement. And so for me, now in preparing this, I went back and watched a lot of the videos from when, in 2018 moving forward, and I can really see a change in my application as I learned and refined and refined. And boy, the first video of me doing it, oh my gosh, it was so bad. I was so stuck in my old practices. I just so desperately wanted to give that animal food, but that's not what the animal wanted. I can see it now so much more clearly than I did then. But I tried it. You know what I mean? I think that was the important thing, is I was open to the idea. And that was a huge turning point, because I still had success, better success than had if I just been trying to force myself on that animal, trying to give it food, making my positive reinforcement coercive. So since then, I counted the presentations I've actually made for my platform and for conferences, and I actually have 24 different presentations that talk about using distance as a reinforcer. Some of them are more targeted towards that than others. And then, literally in practical application, I have definitely applied it hundreds of times now, which has helped me with my refinement and with so many different species. And the thing about the zoo world, as many people know, is we have so many different contexts. So that really helps with the refinement, because I think one of the things that's a little different from us versus the companion world is we, a lot of times we can't create the perfect situation. Not that the companion world always can either, but we don't have the ability necessarily to move an animal into a setup. We have to work with what we have, and so it does force us to sometimes get quite creative. But what a learning experience! It's just an amazing learning experience. So, and I hope to keep building upon that, which has been really helpful. And then I really wanted to give a shout out to Sean Will and Masanishi Muta, because they've also done so many presentations and papers and podcasts and conference presentations, online classes. I think one of the things that they have done that's really amazing is they really get into the weeds and the details about trying to develop protocols, so that it can really facilitate teaching others. And they do a lot of work with teaching other trainers and veterinarians and shelter staff, groomers, pet owners, of course, working with dogs, cats, turtles, tortoises, birds, and equines. And one of the things that they mentioned that I think is really important is that they're really focusing on the assessment portion and really trying to determine what is the consequence that's maintaining the behavior. So that, I think that's so fascinating, because I think for me, I tend to, kind of be a little bit more like, I don't want to say intuitive, because that's obviously what you are assessing something to come to that conclusion. And I think what they're really trying to do is tease that out a little bit more to make it more, make it easier for every person to be able to come to that conclusion. What is the consequence that's maintaining that behavior? And so I think that's really fantastic. So caawt.com is their platform, which is really a great place for you all to learn more about their offerings and how they can help you make those kinds of assessments so that you can get better interventions. And they're saying that they're finding that many the situations where people are jumping to the fact that it might be maintained by negative reinforcement, that it might be maintained by positive reinforcement in their assessments. I will say in our zoo settings, we're finding a lot of things are maintained by negative reinforcement, but who knows, maybe their assessment protocol will help us tease that out a little bit more. In 2020, there was an art and science of animal training conference that was all about negative reinforcement. So I don't know how many people here actually got to attend that, but that was right before the pandemic. So that was a really wonderful opportunity to, and thank goodness we had that opportunity. And that website is still up, so you can visit that and see some of the things that were posted about that, some of the reviews and writings that people had about that. So again, another, really significant moment in which a lot of people had the opportunity to learn more about what people were doing and what these pioneers were doing about these things. And then Hillary Hankey is another person who has really embraced this information and has been applying it with avian species. And so she's got presentations on her platform, lots of video examples with many different avian species. And so if you're somebody who's really interested in working with birds, whether it's raptors, parrots, corvids, hornbills, etc., lots of practical application examples there. And that's at Avian Behavior International. And then working in the zoo community, Annetta Peterson, myself, and Jim Mackey, we've given a workshop called Please Go Away. And we've presented that at the European Association of Zoos and Aquariums. It's been presented at the Zoological Association of America. I've also presented it at several zoos on site for their staff. And it really walks people through this process. With some video examples, they get to apply the procedure to several video examples, and they get to work in groups practicing doing that. So it gives people a little bit of that kind of walking through it so they can understand how to do this a little bit better. Chris says those videos would be interesting to watch as you comment on them, the old ones, I think. We'll watch one of the old ones today. And then Annetta Peterson has also really been somebody who's embraced this approach to negative reinforcement and has put together 3 really impactful presentations. One of them, I think many people here have seen with the tiger example, the huge transformation in literally just 42 minutes, a tiger that had one specific individual that it was showing aggressive responses to, and then using this type of procedure completely changed its behavior to where now that person is able to give this animal injections comfortably. This animal is, if you know what chuffing is with a tiger, which is sort of an affiliative response, it eagerly anticipates this person coming to interact and engage with it for training. And she did a great presentation on superimposition with lots of examples of how addressing that negative reinforcement contingency is so important. And I know I'm forgetting one of them. Oh, the parrots one. She did a great one on parrots that a lot of people here haven't seen. So, but if you come to London, I'm thinking you might be able to see the person who did work the parrots give that presentation. That's what we're hoping. All right. So she's got lots of practical application examples that she has shared. So, and look, here are all those examples: tigers, camels, parrots, muskox, cows, rabbits, saki monkeys, more. So again, just showing that it's possible, I think, which is so amazing. And Annetta's also hosted events at her zoo, and she's one of the people helping to organize and host the event in London with Joe Lang and Paul Andranis, so that more people will be able to learn more about these procedures. And she's also been very impactful with trade organization policy documents, and so I think this is really, really important. And I did want to give a shout out to some of the work that's been done with human learners. Andrew Miller has made some amazing progress with human learners who are showing fair responses to different situations and objects, and really looking forward to seeing more of that, and hopefully some publications coming forth. I've been able to see some of his presentations and poster presentations, and then also Joe and Awab have a paper. If you haven't seen it, I'll definitely put it in the references for folks who want to look that up. That's really fantastic, and some more work coming from AWAB, I believe, in the future on that. And then Jim Mackey has also given several presentations with some practical application examples with a Philippine crocodile, dik-dik, and red river hog. Again, great examples of negative reinforcement being applied in the procedure, similar to what we've described here, that were super successful. So those are just, some things. and again, a lot of this is very focused on what's been happening in the zoo community, again, because that's where I tend to play the most. But what I want to say about the ongoing thing is that, all these people that we've been mentioned here, these people continue to do the work. A lot of them are involved in on-site consultations around the world, not just, in one spot. They're doing outreach. They're doing instruction through learning platforms. They're involved with trade organizations. They do podcasts. They do videos. They do articles. They're teaching others. And we're working with a wide variety of species, from dogs and cats and exotics and zoo species, companion animals. And these folks are really working hard to promote the accurate use of negative reinforcement-based procedures based on, what is the animal seeking? What's the outcome they're seeking? And I think they've done an amazing job reaching trainers across all parts of the world and trying to teach how to properly implement these procedures. So I really wanted to make sure that those folks got some recognition for what they're doing, because it's been a hard journey. And I kind of wanted to maybe give you a bit of an overview of how I saw that journey. So to me, if you think about the 1950s, those were the scientific foundations, the roots. And then all those empirical studies that were done, that's kind of the trunk of this tree here. And then those practical applications that everybody's been doing, maybe those are the branches of our tree. And then the leaves, those are all those refinements, all those many, many practical applications that people have been doing with the procedures. We keep refining it and refining it and refining it. And then the fruits of our labor, that, we get to disseminate this information and share with people, and hopefully people get to grab those fruits and ingest them and take from that what they can. But I will say, along the way, we've had people chopping away at this tree, pushing back at all the work that all these people have been doing, and that's been pretty tough. And so I did want to mention that it's taken a lot of courage from people who have been working so hard at that. And some of the things that has happened, I've certainly experienced some of this, and I've certainly observed some of this. So. And Annetta says, thank you. All thanks to me sharing important information. Don't forget that. Well, I played a small part, but, I think there's a lot of others that, have been doing a lot of great work, and I want to make sure they get acknowledged. There has been shunning for sure, dismissiveness, bans from platforms. I can attest to that one. Exclusion from events. I can also attest to that one. Mischaracterization of their work. We have certainly seen, I certainly have, at one time I labeled it coercive, and I know other people have, experienced that, where their work was labeled coercive for using this. Crediting it to others, that one is really hard to take, especially when you see all the hard work those folks have done. Please make sure those folks get credited. Procedures described incorrectly. We're seeing that as recently, just now, those procedures being described incorrectly. And, I get it. If you haven't been doing it, that can happen. But, then, maybe wait a little bit before talking about it. Legal or financial setbacks, coordinated pushback efforts. That one certainly has been experienced. Public scrutiny and professional risk while they refine the procedures over thousands of applications and shared their findings. So, I really wanted to point that out, because a lot of us do put our information out there knowing that it will get critiqued. And knowing that it's not perfect, knowing that the examples we're sharing have some rough edges still, and that we're working on the refinements. And it's a shame when people are are not so nice about it, so instead of in the spirit of, hey, let's work together and make this better so that the animals get better outcomes, it's treated, very dismissively or like I said, shunned or dismissed, and like I said, I remember when, Jesus got a lot of criticism in the early stages when he introduced this. And I will say, like, again, based on the background that I had at that time, I definitely was one of those people, and I have, a lot of remorse for that and a lot of regret for that. And I'm grateful that I turned a corner and have embraced that. But I remember being judgmental about it all. And I think, we can do better than that. So, but I will say these pioneers have shown persistence in the face of resistance. And I don't think it's for recognition. I really don't. I think it's for the animals and the learners to receive the appropriate interventions. And because of that persistence, we see animals getting better outcomes. I mean, that's really the, and for those of you who do apply this procedure, you know what I'm talking about. The feeling when you see an animal go, oh, thank you for giving me what I wanted. You just go away. When you see that animal turn a corner, it's just, I think that was the reinforcement for me that made me go, oh my gosh, that I'm all in. I am using this procedure. Alex says, I'm so glad you're speaking of this now because I think negative reinforcement procedures are about to experience a renaissance in dog training, which is exciting, but will likely increase these problematic issues. Yeah. Well, hopefully we can help remind people it's important to recognize those folks that did all this work. Oh yes, Jesus took a lot of beating up for being one of the first pioneers. I know from the Danish dog world. Yeah, I know Jesus definitely took a lot of criticism, and like I said, I definitely was one of those folks that was being pretty critical at first, and I do acknowledge that. So yeah, and there was, like, I did put together a little timeline of some of the things, over the years. And again, I go back to thinking about where I was in my career at that time, where, like what teachings I was under the influence and when that all changed. And, looking, thinking about, if you go back to the chart of, I'm going to go back to this chart, I think, kind of when these empirical studies started was about the 2000s, right? And I see that, like kind of in 2004, and again, we had already been heavily taught back then to, only use positive reinforcement, but I can see that in 2004, there was articles saying, only positive reinforcement. 2008, an articles heavily saying, only positive reinforcement. And again, 2013, 2017, 2018, 2020, 2022, 2025, it still is sort of, very consistently messaging that's, keeps coming out over and over again, sort of saying, nope, nope, nope. So that little person with the axe is still, whoever those people are, they're still kind of chipping away, saying, no, don't, this is not the way to go. So the pushback's been pretty consistent over the years. But what I did want to focus on really is not so much that, but again, all the great work that's been done. So I wanted to talk a little bit, and we'll share some videos now, yay, of some of the things that were important to me. So for me, my first experience, I've talked about it before, was, again, I had the opportunity as a consultant to say, I'm just going to try this. And I was in Poland, and there were some wild asses afraid of people. And so I tried it with these wild asses, and my application was so unrefined, but, these animals that nobody could really approach, they would, what they were doing was, kind of just going up to them and really, kind of overwhelming them with their presence, and the animals were fleeing from them. I would approach and retreat, and eventually by the end of the session, I was able to give them food from my hand, which I was quite excited about. And so I was like, oh my gosh, this works. Again, very unrefined if you watch the video. I decided not to share that video because it's not the best, not the most exciting one to watch. But I will. You guys have seen this tiger one many, many times, but I thought I would share it because it was not that long afterwards. And but I think what's interesting to watch about it is what's unrefined about it is that there's things that I would change about it now, and you can look for it, is the animal's in a small space, so it can't really get away from me. So it's up to me to make the decision to move away, right? So it can't use escape very much. So to me, I would have the animal in a larger space if I could. And I'm using too much extinction. So the animal is giving me some undesired responses, and I'm waiting for those responses to extinguish before I remove myself. And so even though they're not very elevated responses, it's still relying on extinction there. And so what I would do differently now, and remember, this is 2018, so this is, we're talking 7 years ago, and me just learning how to apply this, I would not go so close that the animal needs to use that response, or if I saw that response, I would go away. That's what I would do now, so that response still works instead of having him, wait to give me something else. So that would be a refinement that I would use now as opposed to what I did then, because I didn't know any better. But what I think is still fascinating is I still got amazing results, which was still reinforcing to me that I'm on the right path, that this is better than trying to force that animal to take food in my presence, right? So let's watch this video, and you can think about the refinements that you might consider watching it, or if you were doing it. And remember, this is a wild caught tiger. This is a tiger that's doesn't have good experiences with people. And in the beginning, you'll see the person's trying to get him to target, and you can see there's body language that you might describe as aggressive or fearful. So what I'm looking at is that he's looking at me, right? And he's a little concerned, but now he's not. And see how he's not? I would walk away from that. I would be like, okay, that's cool. So you can see he's growling there, and so right there was some extinction, right? I probably could have removed myself sooner. And again, could have removed myself sooner there. Looking now. I'm really trying to get up there. Yes, ma'am.
Itu sudah bertambah lah kalamnya.
So that's the idea. All right. So another really significant moment for me, which was not too long after that, was working with some wolves that were so afraid of people. They were all the way on the other side of the habitat. And we needed them to shift into a space that wasn't really super well designed for wolves. And what I noticed is when we would walk away, they would kind of walk towards where we were. So in my head, I was like, oh, I can use that. And very quickly, we were able to shape wolves walking towards us by walking away from that. And so that was another one of those like really wow moments for me, understanding, the power of giving distance as a reinforcer. And because of that experience, I actually took a contract in the UAE where the goal was to train wild caught herds of antelope to recall. When I was given that challenge, I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do that? But really, because of the experience with the wolves, I was like, I think I can do this. Had I not had that experience, I don't think there was any way I could have done that, because, the traditional method would have been, oh, you got to get these animals to take food from you and then, work on pairing food with the, the sound and get them to come and blah, blah, blah. And, I wouldn't have had any understanding of addressing the negative reinforcement contingency. But because of that, we had success, and we did it repeatedly with all sorts of herds over there of flighty antelope. It was really amazing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a video of a little bit of the process with a dik-dik, so you can kind of see, and you'll see the refinements are better. Where there's lots of little behaviors that are being responded to. This is one of the staff members there who was very good at taking the direction and applying it. And then I'm going to show you a different video that Annetta shared with me that I think is really cool. So let's first look at just an application of the procedure with a dik-dik. Oh, did he close a little? Oh, nice. So very, very nice example there, in my opinion, of how, she was so close to that at that point. If she wanted to transition to maybe offering some food, she probably could maybe place it nearby, toss it nearby. So, so there are just so many examples now. Some you have seen from me where, we were able to close doors on gorillas that wouldn't allow it before, bears afraid of people in the back area, cranes showing territorial aggression, a goat afraid of topical medication, giraffes and donkeys afraid of touch. So many more examples. I did want to share some more videos with you in just a second here. And all of these have been more opportunities for refinement, more context, and now we've had years of application and hundreds of case studies. And, you know, it's just been phenomenal. So many species: big cats, small cats, canids, hoofstock, primates, elephants, giraffes, camels, birds, great apes, bears, domestic species. And I think what's even more important is it's many people. So these procedures are learned and implemented by their caregivers who work with these animals. And to me, that's really the most important thing, because it's just sort of exponential. And that means so many more animals are being helped. And so the examples I want to share with you now, Annetta shared this with me. Annetta, you're going to have to help me with the zoo name and the name of the person here who's doing the work. But this is some nilgai that hoofstock, afraid of people. So when I was saying, you know, how in the UAE we worked with all these wild-caught hoofstock that wouldn't come anywhere near people, this is basically the same kind of concept. These animals were so far away, and they're not going to come up to you to take food from you. If you tossed food at them, they'd run away and scatter. You can't, it's not going to work. So using the consequence they want, which is distance as a reinforcer, you can shape desired responses, and you can do it with herds. And this is sort of the before and after with these animals.
Det er sådan, at det starter. De står helt nede i modsat hjørne, og ikke så glade for, at man kommer for tæt på. Så det vil jeg begynde at arbejde på. Og her kommer de i en lang række, lige så stille og roligt heroppe af. Det er dejligt. Det gør det noget nemmere for mig at gå rundt herinde. Så jeg siger tak for hjælpen, da du var at kigge med træning af dem her. Det har båret frugt indtil videre. Nu er vi lige taget et par skridt tilbage, på grund af at der er kommet en ny tyr i går og blevet lukket i anlægget, så de er lidt nervøse lige nu her, men det skal vi nok få lavet om på. Se, det er så det, jeg er nået til nu med træningen indtil videre. At de er meget tæt på, meget mere trygge ved at være i anlægget sammen med mig. Og nogle gange så opsøger de mig egentlig bare, fordi de er nysgerrige på, hvad jeg egentlig laver. Så følger de efter mig, når jeg går op mod stallen igen. Så det går rigtig godt. Din bandit. Det er ikke meningen, du skal tage af dig selv.
So let me read Annetta's comment. So it's, I probably won't pronounce his name correctly, Tom Skovgaard Hansen from Givskud Zoo. And she was just saying that, you know, you at the beginning you saw where they started, and after some time they using negative reinforcement, they move forward. They're called nilgai. And now the bull is eating from the bucket, coming all the way up close to eat from the bucket. So pretty cool. Yeah. All right. Let's see what else I've got to show you here. I think only because I'm going to run out of time here. Let's see. Maybe we'll show the porcupine. I think I'll show the porcupine here. So Netta, we'll show the porcupine from your facility. So these porcupine, I'll let you, why don't you explain while we watch what is going on with the porcupine? Before, so afraid that they would never even come out in the presence of keepers.
Godmorgen, Pam. Kom så ud med det. Goddag, goddag. Goddag med dig. Det er fint. Hjælper du også? Fint. Det er det. Ja, det er godt. Sådan. Sådan så lidt.
So I'll read some of the comments here. Annetta also taught a farmer to use negative reinforcement to gather his herd of cows. That's true. And she's also explaining a little bit more with the porcupines that the keepers never saw them outside the box after they first arrived at the zoo. Like they would never come out when keepers were there. And so they use negative reinforcement to kind of gradually open that box, and so they could start using negative reinforcement to approach them and then eventually get them to come out and be able to use positive reinforcement to reinforce coming out. So I know we're not showing you the whole procedure, just more of the before and after, but these are just a few examples. There were a lot more, but I'm going to run out of time. So I'm going to have to move on a little bit here, but just giving you a little taste of, these are the kinds of, challenging problems that are being able to be addressed because of learning these procedures. So I did want to comment on some, kind of recent ironic turns, that some of these contemporary interpretations of that we're hearing about this work kind of closely resemble or maybe kind of reinterpret some of the things we're sharing with you today. They're kind of redefining or, what these pioneers have done, and sometimes they're not really giving proper attribution. It might be incomplete or inaccurate, or maybe it's just absent. And so I want to draw your attention to that if you're somebody who's watching this for the first time. To me, it's we want to be careful about limited public recognition of the originator of these ideas, or not acknowledging dismissal of their work in the past. I think that's why I'm trying to own my dismissal of the work in the past, because I acknowledge it, I own it. I also think it's in part because I didn't have enough knowledge. And now that I'm learning more, I feel like I can understand why I was dismissive, and now hopefully I can do better. And so that's why we're trying to clarify this historical and scientific record out of respect for the hard work those folks did, and those who contributed to it, and the learners and animals that we continue to serve. And so it also requires a little bit of clarification on some things that we've been hearing lately. And this is also important for scientific accuracy. So in my opinion, I heard a statement that animals are saying no because behaviors were so difficult now. I think the videos we shared are showing you that that's not the case. I think animals frequently say no under many conditions. And I think maybe what was happening is in the past, we just weren't taught to pay attention to those no's because of maybe that overriding emphasis on positive reinforcement procedures and reduction strategies. So, so a lot of the examples I shared with you were just things where animals wouldn't approach us, not willing to take food, not really difficult behaviors, I would say. We're not talking about injections or hoof care or anything painful. This is just basic behaviors maintained by negative reinforcement, and we were just not seeing the contingency for whatever reason. I think, in my opinion, it's because of the overarching theme of you must use positive reinforcement that taught us not to look for that contingency. I also think it's really important that we understand what negative reinforcement looks like in a constructional program. So again, remember, we're not inserting aversive stimuli to evoke responses. We are talking about behavior that's maintained by aversive stimuli already in the environment, or something that might be needed to care for the animal. So maybe we need to give an injection. Maybe we need to do an ultrasound behavior. And so those instruments are going to be there. And again, we're not using extinction if we can, avoid it by all costs. We're letting the animal use that behavior that has always worked for them. And there's not like timed exposures. I don't think there's a protocol that anybody has where you say you have to stand there for 3 seconds before you remove yourself. Those procedures are as varied as a positive reinforcement procedure. So, and we continue to refine them as more and more people apply them in different environments. I also wanted to make sure that people understand assent. There are several great resources out there. You can go to the original Gold Diamond paper from 1974. Anna Linehan et al. Is a great paper. Abdel Jalil, there's another great paper. Et al. That's a great paper that talk about assent, that there needs to be genuine choice, basically more than one way to access that desired, same desired outcome. So a single start button that leads to one reinforcer would not be genuine assent. There would need to be several pathways to get to that same desired outcome in order for assent to be present. So we just want to make sure that clarification was out there. And I think there's also been a misrepresentation of the constructional approach in general, or elements of it, that it's maybe not that it's significant or really isn't that different or doesn't have that much of an impact on what we're doing. And maybe that's just due to maybe not enough information out there, or maybe not proper application. I certainly encourage people to continue to get familiar with it and learn more. I personally have found it to be very dramatically influential on the work that I'm doing, and helping me improve my intervention. So I certainly encourage people to learn more about that if you haven't already. Let's see. I'm going to also talk a little bit about the fallout of having misinformation and misrepresentation. I do think it leads to delayed or ineffective interventions. So again, I encourage you to, make sure the information you're taking in is as accurate as possible if you can. It can lead to prolonged distress for animals who really want distance as a reinforcer. And again, as we've discussed, practitioners can face professional consequences, whether it's exclusion, public criticism, or other consequences. And for trying to implement these evidence-based practices. And so again, it also really underscores the need for an intellectual integrity. It's so important. It hurts my heart when I see all these people and the good work that they're doing either getting misrepresented or not being credited to them, and other people benefiting off of it, whether it's financially or reputationally, when those other folks did so much great work. We've also seen restrictive industry standards. Like some trade organizations require people to pledge to only use positive reinforcement. And essentially there's, kind of a contingency there that says, you can't get credentialed if you don't do this. So that's really a shame as well. And of course, we've seen polarization and division within the field where, you basically are punished for having open inquiry and a slowing of the scientific process if you explore this stuff, which is a shame, because it's really just all about kind of, improving animal welfare. So it's really kind of a shame that process has been observed. So what can we do? Well, my thought was we should give them their flowers, right? Cite your original sources and acknowledge those contributors and the contributions of those who laid the foundation. Don't erase the complexity of the scientific journey. This is a hard journey, and it's not over yet. It's, if we go all the way back to the 50s, that's a pretty longer journey, but the big turn, I think, happened about 20 years ago. And share the accurate history, whether you are somebody who teaches, if you're giving a lecture at a conference, if you're writing an article, or if you're just sharing on social media. I think it's really important to preserve the integrity of this field. I would also say we should actively support those who are continuing to advance this work through teaching, publishing, and applied practices. And hopefully if you go back to those charts, you'll see some of those folks, but I know there's more out there as well. And learn directly from the pioneers and those people who are continuing that work. I know there's more than those been mentioned on that list. And their documented work, and thoughtfully integrate these procedures into your own training programs. That's where the real magic happens as we continue to spread this information. And most importantly, engage critically with the content out there on negative reinforcement, particularly when it comes from those with limited experience or without demonstrated familiarity with the constructional approach perspective that we share today and some of our other resources. So I hope that, that gives you some, real action items you can take when we talk about celebrating some of these unsung real heroes that we've shared today. I did want to read Annetta's comment about the porcupine. After some sessions, they could start training a recall to get them to come out while they watched them. They even came to get peanuts from the keepers, which was not in the video with the porcupine. So that's really important to share there. I do want to give you a recap here. Dun-da-da. The modern application of constructional approaches using negative reinforcement is a pivotal advancement in our field. I really think it is. It's just been so amazing. It's been pioneered by scientific practitioners who face considerable resistance. I got to acknowledge that too. This work has transformed how we address behaviors maintained by escape and avoidance, improving outcomes for animals across species. Honoring their contributions supports both scientific accuracy and more effective practice. Over-reliance on positive reinforcement, even though we love it, has led to blind spots to desired outcomes, maintaining behaviors, delays in intervention, and prolonged animal distress. Misunderstanding negative reinforcement limits progress. So clarifying these concepts protects the integrity of the science and its value in real-world application. As this work gains attention, it's critical to cite original sources, learn from those who build the foundation, and scrutinize repackaged ideas. Progress was hard-won, driven by persistence, data, and a commitment to animal well-being. We honor that legacy by carrying it forward with rigor and respect. So, Kristen, who is actually a great supporter and practical application person of this information, she has done some great shaping with negative reinforcement when it's appropriate. Says, thanks always for being brave and sharing thoughts, ideas. And you've seen her in action shaping with negative reinforcement in some of our video examples. So some more resources. As always, I do want to mention we do have the course When the Right Thing is Negative, Optimizing Welfare with Negative Reinforcement. And that also has some PDFs to help guide you through the process, like a little checklist. And again, if you haven't taken it before, Freeing Crabs from the Bucket, Reaching Our Potential by Recognizing Others is a great course on plagiarism. Really goes into the details so you can understand what plagiarism looks like. And then I mentioned Annetta's courses where she talks about negative reinforcement and that wonderful transformation with the tiger. If you really want to see all those videos and all the data, that's all in there. And then also all those wonderful video examples about superimposition, where she gives so many examples, that video examples, so you can really understand what superimposition looks like, how to address that. That is in that course right there. And then I talked a lot about training wild-caught herds in the UAE, so there is a course on that as well. And then there's a really nice podcast about effective reinforcement with Jesus Rosales-Ruiz and Mary Hunter. So those are just some of the resources in Animal Training Fundamentals that you can check out if you want to continue this interesting exploration into negative reinforcement and how it can benefit you and the animals that you're working with. All right, so what else is on the horizon? The Association of Behavior Analysis International. Annetta and I are going to be there, as well as Cameron Scallon and Ryan Talbot, and we're going to be talking about compassionate interventions using the constructional approach. So I hope if you are in Washington, D.C., you'll come join us. That's going to be in May. And then, of course, if you haven't heard about it yet, we've been talking about it. This is only 2 months away. This is crazy. We've been talking about it for a while, but it's been creeping up on us. We're going to be in London with Joe Lang and Paul Andranis, and it's almost sold out. So you definitely want to get your spot. The reason the on-site is limited to 100 is because there are going to be live training demos, and we can only fit so many people there. So if you can't come to London, be sure to sign up for the online version, because you can attend the online version as well. But do make that happen as soon as possible, because there are very limited in-person seats left. If you did like this, there is the citation, and we do appreciate sharing this one, because obviously we're trying to give shout outs to all those people who've done so much great work. If you like wearing it on your chest or your sleeve or on your coffee cup. We also have some merchandise you can get. Other ways you can support us: share our newsletter, share the videos, become a member. And if you become a member, you can get your animal training credentials. We have a pretty rigorous program, and you get badges and recognition for what you have studied. Here is how you join our program. You go to animaltrainingfundamentals.com. We have a monthly option at $39 a month, a 20% discount if you join at the annual. And our best deal is for facilities, where you can have up to 200 sub-accounts, where you get to track your own studies, get your own badges, get your own credentials. And if you need something a little bit more in between, we do have an YouTube membership, which is more affordable. You don't get all the whistles and bells, but you do get some great content at a good price. All right, there we go. We covered a lot. Oh, cool. We have somebody joining us in London who's here. Oh, it's going to be great. Be sure to come up and say hi. I'm really looking forward to London. That's going to be fantastic. Don't forget to get your travel visa. Oh, and bring some merch. Oh, I hadn't thought about that. Well, interesting. Okay, maybe I'll bring something light. Maybe some stickers or something. Cool. All right. Well, and actually, I know there's talk about making something. And Al says, great work, Barbara, Annetta, and the pioneers. Yeah, I didn't get to share all the videos because I was running out of time. But you know what? We'll get them in presentations so that you can see more of them at some of these events. So, but thank you so much for listening, and I hope that some of that, maybe you knew it all already, maybe not, but it's always fun to give a shout out to the people that I think have done some amazing work over the years and deserve some recognition, and they worked hard for it. And I'm so glad that people are starting to recognize the value in this procedure and continuing to refine it, as we always will, and how so that it can help more animals that are experiencing a need for some distance. We want to give it to them, don't we? So that our positive reinforcement can be more effective. All right. Well, there we go. We went a little bit over. I don't want to keep you. In any case, it was great to have you here, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you, everybody, for being here, and have a great day. Bye.